What's going on, guys? So, we just finished another episode of X-Men 97, Episode 7, Bright Eyes. All right, so we were coming up on the heels right after, the death of Gambit, the death of many of the mutants and Genosha at the hands of this mysterious Sentinel. And this episode really dealt with tackling the ideas of grief and loss and how people deal with it differently. And there's no set way of how people usually deal with these things. And it was really apparent in this episode. And once again, this is something I've always enjoyed about X-Men, is that they've always showed these larger than life people with these incredible abilities, but they're really human at the very center of it. So I thought that was pretty cool thing to show. This video is going to be spoiler filled. If you don't want to be spoiled, please take time to click off the video, go watch the episode, come back, watch the review, and then leave a comment to let me know what you guys think of X-Men 97 Episode 7. Alright, so the episode opens right at Gambit's funeral, man. We get to see multiple people show up in the episode, not just the X-Men, also some of, Remy's family from the Thief Guild. They also showed up to pay their respects. Kurt does the professionals, very beautiful how he always talks about how Gambit lives by the cards, but he also let himself become mediocre in his own mind, believing that he couldn't make a difference, that he couldn't be a hero, and even at the final moments of his life, he was a hero. And I thought that was pretty cool that, Kurt played those things up properly. Better that he do it because, he is an ordained minister. He is extremely religious, but he just gave a beautiful, heartfelt message about Gambit and the life he left behind. We get to see all the X-Men reeling from it, especially Jubilee as she's asking, where's Rogue? And as I was watching the funeral scene, I was looking around the screen for her. And when I didn't see her, I knew exactly what would be going on. I did see the clips on YouTube, but then when she wasn't at the funeral, like I said, people deal with grief differently. And this is hinted at by Logan and Kurt. When Kurt even says that she has a reason to be afraid if Rogue is not here. And, Rogue is flying through the air. She's heading straight through the desert, head straight for a military base, and she is just going ham. If you're thinking about the name Rogue, she really goes rogue in this episode. She's basically attacking this military base. She's going hard. There's even a scene where she's destroying a tank with another military machine, and to see the look in her eyes as she's doing it. There's like a quick flash scene of how her eyes kind of like shrink a little bit, her pupils, and she's just destroying shit. She's just going hard. And a lot of people don't realize how powerful she is. We see her held back a little bit because she's an X-Man. But in this episode, there was no hold back. She was going hard in this episode. We also get a pretty cool, cameo from, Thunderbolt Ross. He's actually at this base. And he even says, he gives a Hulk reference when he says, this base was, designed to withstand the Hulk. But it's not, designed to withstand Rogue, who ends up breaking through anyway. And she ends up throwing a threat at him about trying to figure out where Gyrick is. I thought it was pretty cool in this episode that we got a Hulk reference, since the Hulk has been in the X-Men before in the animated series. I think it's when he went up against Juggernaut. But it was pretty cool getting that reference. I like how the show has been showing that all these other heroes exist in this series. I think that's so great. It just gives so many different ideas that can happen in the future. And I cannot wait to see where it goes. So back forward to the X-Men, Scott is extremely pissed. He's talking to, Kelly, who has become the president, and Kelly is trying to withhold his help towards Genosha. He says he's done all he can, and he doesn't want to do any more, or that he can't for political reasons. Because a lot of regular humans have problems with the mutants, he doesn't want to ruin his campaign by throwing in with the mutants, which this kind of leaves Scott and a couple of the other X-Men pissed off. But despite all this, Scott decides to take the X-Men and they head to Genosha, I guess in a new version of the Blackbird, and they show up to help a lot of the relief effort. Now, as this is going on, Rogue ends up making it to the area or the location to where Ross had told her about Gyrick. But when she gets there, she finds none other than Captain America, Steve Rogers, there to stop her in her tracks. Cap knows that, Cap is strong, but he is not on that level of strength. And in one step, in one little final moment in her movement, Rogue could end his life in no instant. It wouldn't even be a hard, difficult thing for her to do. But Cap does what he always does best, and he manages to calm her down and talk her down. She even refers to him as America's top cop, which I thought was completely funny. But Cap also, tells Rogue that he's looking for Gyrick as well, and Trask. And, he shows her this base, and he's trying to show her that they're looking for this operation called OZT, but they can't figure out exactly what it means. And Rogue, they pretty much are able to figure out that there is something going on in Mexico. Now, Rogue tries to ask Cap to help her out, but Cap, as most comic book fans know, has always been by the book. He's always been a guy who's gone with the rules. He's never tried to change it. And he says taking an American flag or American colors into Mexico is going to cause problems. Rogue takes this as a personal thing because it was mutants that got hurt. Whereas Cap completely understands this. It's not that he doesn't understand. He just has a way that he has to do things, and he can't just do things the way she wants to. Because of this, she gets pissed off and she ends up throwing his shield miles away. And she only does this to keep him busy. She's pissed off at the situation, but she does it to keep him out of the way as long as possible for her to make it to Mexico. Now, back at the, at Genosha, at the ruins of Genosha, we get a little scene with Jubilee and, Robert DaCosta where he's explaining that he's still trying to hide, his mutant stuff from his mom. He doesn't want to tell her about it. He's trying to keep it quiet. And, she doesn't, Jubilee makes a good point where she says, what if you had been here? Your parents would have no clue about what has happened to you. And, Robert DaCosta does some thinking, and he's like, you know what, come with me real quick. And they end up leaving. Rogue ends up finding Gyrick shortly after this, and she actually uses her abilities to siphon her memories because he says something about that the telepathic abilities won't work on him. So instead of that, Rogue uses her abilities of draining to try to take the memories away from him. But she ends up passing out. But this gets really interesting where Scott and Jean are going, underground to try to find any more survivors of Genosha. And, as they're doing that, Jean is hit with all of these memories, all these thoughts. And it's kind of heartbreaking when you think about she's seeing what their last thoughts are right before they died. It's a real sad thing if you could do that, if you could go back and you could watch as people are about to pass away, what they're thinking right as it's going down, right as it's happening to them. Because she's saying all their fears, all their dreams that have been destroyed, all their last moment thoughts. She's reliving all that as she's standing there. There was also another scene where I liked where Beast is talking with the reporter who he had somewhat of a relationship with. And you can see all the X-Men are feeling the effects of Genosha. Beast is hurt because he felt like that they have only been tolerated, that they haven't been accepted, but have been dealing with, the humans have been dealing with them, not accepting them. And it's heartbreaking watching Beast broken up like that, especially as we know from the beginning part of X-Men animated series, Beast was always willing to try to work with humans. Even when he stayed in jail, he tried to believe in what was going on, what Xavier dreamed about. But as you can see, everything that has happened is beginning to affect the mutants in such a way, even the X-Men, where they're starting to change how they view humans or if they will ever be tolerated at all. And as Jean and Scott are looking, Jean gets hit with a psychic, link, and Scott automatically thinks it's Madeline. But as he's going there, they actually don't find Madeline, but they find Emma Frost. And it actually turns out that Beast even admits that she's actually crystallized her whole self. And Beast admits that this is the first time she's ever done it. She's never been able to make herself into full crystal. And I like that we're getting these mutations that happen to mutants because this does happen to a lot of mutants in the comics. Their mutant abilities will enhance as time goes on. And I like that we're seeing a lot of that. So, Trask admits to Sinister's involvement after the X-Men get a call from them, and he says, hey, look, he admits his involvement and tells them that Sinister is also part of it and that he gives them location of how to find them. At this same time, DaCosta takes Jubilee back to his home, and Robert ends up explaining to his mom that he's a mutant. But they already were kind of aware that he was keeping that secret and wanted to give him time to talk about it. It's a real heartfelt moment until you realize that his parents want to keep this quiet. They don't want to talk about it. They kind of just want to act like it didn't happen and just come up with an excuse so that way their shareholders and their business don't take a plummet. And it's also something that mutants have dealt with, where instead of being accepted, they have to be kept a secret in some way to protect things, and that kind of hurts them. Later on down the line, a lot of the X-Men arrive at Mexico, and they end up finding Rogue. And there's a good scene where, Kurt is the one there for her first because they are brother and sister, even by adoption. And Kurt holds her while Rogue finally admits the fact that Gambit is gone. She didn't want to fully accept it. And I like that, like I said before in this episode was about grief and how people deal with it and how sometimes we can become ignorant to our pain because we don't want to accept what has happened. But in this scene, we get to see her accept it on a level. Now, at this same time, Bastion actually appears and kills Trask. It turns out that it was him that had been orchestrating everything together, and Bastion ends up murdering Trask in order to keep him quiet so he doesn't become a liability to what he has coming next, or he has already outlived his usefulness and he has no reason for him anymore. Now, as the X-Men arrive at this place, that Trask has given them the location, they find Trask, we find all these different Sentinels, all these different operations that were created. Some of the X-Men didn't even know that the United Nations were involved in some of this stuff. And they find Trask. He's standing at the edge of a ledge. He's trying to take his own life, feeling like it is his fault for his failures. Now, the X-Men try to talk him down from taking his own life, and Rogue manages to stop him from jumping off the ledge. But in an instant after that, Gyrick admits more to what they have to tell them about who's involved and what, OZT stands for Operation Zero Tolerance. And not only does Trask feel bad about what has happened to the mutants, he's realizing is that his tech and his knowledge has also been used, that it will harm humans in the future as time goes on. So Rogue, already still dealing with her pain, throws Trask off the building. Now, this is kind of a dark point for a lot of the X-Men, because even Morph says, is this what we're going to do now? Is this what we're about now? But Wolverine even admits that, hey, this is something that we all wanted to do. So Rogue is going on this rant about how Trask deserves it. And about a second later, she's hit with something that none of the X-Men were ready for. Suddenly, the entire building is on fire. Everything's in ruins. And at the head of those ruins, we find Trask. He's still alive, but he's mutated into some kind of human sentinel. This sentinel has completely taken control of him, and it's basically a superpowered being that is able to destroy mutants. So the X-Men, band together, and it's actually a pretty cool scene where, the building starts falling apart. Jean stops the debris from falling, and Scott shoots the building to separate it so that Jean can throw the rest of the building into the ocean, which I thought was a pretty legit cool scene. It shows just their powers and how strong they are. So at this point, the X-Men go up against Trask to try to stop him. And it was pretty cool watching that fight scene because it was a split second where Morph turns into Quicksilver. And it happened so fast that every time Morph has transformed into someone, it happens in such a nonchalant way that if you're not paying attention, you would be surprised where this mutant came from. Maybe it's just me, but they did it in such a subtle way that every time Morph transforms, whether or not it's Psylocke or Quicksilver, it happens so quick, you don't see it coming. So, Morph takes a strong shot to the face. I don't know if he survives or not, but the rest of the X-Men do battle with the Trask Sentinel, and he's beating them within the inches of their life. They're all getting hard hits. It's looking like none of them are going to stand a chance, but then a grenade appears and it takes the Trask Sentinel out. And that grenade came from nobody other than Cable and in the episode Bright Eyes. And that grenade comes from Cable. And Cable has appeared, and he's admitted that there is someone who's worse off than Sinister, that's worse off than Trask. And he has arrived to help them stop them. But not only that, this will be the first time that Scott's finding out that Cable is actually Nathan Summers, his son. At the very end of the episode, we actually find out that it's Bastion Now we find that someone is being held captive somewhere. They have someone chained up, and it's none other than Magneto, who has been held hostage by Bastion. He's kept his death quiet, and not only that, but he now knows that Professor Xavier is still alive, and that the fact that he is on his way back to Earth to figure out what is going on. But it was an incredible episode. Like I said, it was an episode that definitely tackled grief. It definitely tackled how we all handle grief, how we handle loss. You know, I cannot wait to see what they do with these final 3 episodes. As the way I see is they have like 3 seasons of this show they're working on. And I'm so excited to see how the X-Men come to the answer of this. I have heard of a E for Extinction comic, and as well as an Onslaught comic. And I'm going to try to check those out to see what they're about. Not before I watch the episodes. I'll probably wait until this whole season is over and then probably refer back to watch it and try to look at the details all together. But this was a fantastic episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Remember, like the video, leave a comment down below. Let me know your favorite scene in the episode or what you thought about this episode. And I will catch you guys in the next one. Later.